Good evening. My name is Dennis Weibolt, and I'm a junior at Boston College and the chairman of the Boston Intercollegiate Government, alongside Malika Pajuri, a sophomore at MIT and the director of our Committee on Governmental Affairs. Welcome to this Newton City Council special election debate with candidates Brian Barash, Tariq Lucas, David Mickley, John Oliver, and Madeline Rinaldi. Tonight's debate is sponsored by the Boston Intercollegiate Government, also known as BIG, a nonpartisan coalition of student governments in the greater Boston area that advocates for student interests on local, state, and federal levels. Founded nearly 2 decades ago and recognized in 2003 by the City of Boston as an effective means of advocacy for college-age students in the greater Boston area, BIG now represents over 60,000 undergraduates and continues to expand its footprint through events with policymakers and initiatives supporting a stronger Boston community.
We have designed the format of tonight's debate to maximize the time each candidate has to answer the pressing questions that Newton voters have about the city's future. As such, we will begin with 3-minute opening statements from each candidate and then proceed into 4 rounds of questioning. During each round of questioning, the first speaker, selected at random, will have 2 minutes to respond. Any candidates wishing to offer a rebuttal may raise their virtual hand for 1 minute of response time. At the conclusion of our questions, each candidate will have the opportunity to offer a 2-minute closing statement. While the candidates are speaking, Dennis or I will raise our physical hands to indicate that half of the candidate's speaking time has elapsed. The particular questions and the order in which they will be asked has not been shared with any of the candidates. With the help of our public relations team, we have compiled 4 general areas of debate pertinent to Newton voters: COVID-19, sustainability and energy, affordable housing, and policing.
Tonight's event is being recorded, and at its conclusion, the recording will be posted on the Boston Intercollegiate Government social media pages. To access the recording, please follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn at BIGSTUGOVT. Before we begin, I would like to remind our candidates and the audience that we expect this to be an insightful and respectful event. BIG has not and will not endorse any candidate in this race, so we sincerely hope to learn from the answers that the candidates provide. And with that, I'll hand it off to Malika for opening statements.
Thanks, Dennis. As mentioned, we will begin with 3-minute opening statements from each candidate. We will physically raise our hands once 1.5 minutes have passed. Dennis, is your timer ready? Fantastic. Candidate Rinaldi, you may begin your 3-minute opening statement when you're ready.
Fantastic. Can everybody hear me? Great. Okay. First of all, thank you so much, Malika, and to Boston Intercollegiate Government for hosting this debate tonight. My name's Madeline Rinaldi, but you can call me Maddie. Like you all, I'm a student, and I'm also a lifelong Newton resident, a Newton Public Schools grad, a political advocate, and a candidate for Newton City Council at large from Ward 1 in our March 16 special election. I've grown up around public service here in Newton, and I'm part of a generation of young people who are stepping up politically to address some of the most urgent crises we face and who want to create a more just and equitable future. I'm a seasoned political advocate, having served for the past 2.5 years at March for Our Lives Massachusetts and working in the everyday functions of government for Massachusetts Senators Ed Markey and Elizabeth Warren, and finally at the Department of Energy in their Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. I'm running because I grew up in a Newton that espoused values of diversity and inclusion and generosity, but that has often failed to live up to those values, and that too often shies away from setting an example of brave leadership for other cities and towns to follow. There are numerous issues we have to tackle here in Newton, and I'm sure we'll get into a deeper discussion later, but just a few in particular that are really central to my campaign. The first of which is a just COVID recovery, which looks like an evidence-based and community-based approach that embodies equity and safety. This looks like aiding our local businesses, continuing to enforce common sense precautions, protecting our senior citizens, and working collaboratively to get our students back in school safely. We also need to step up on issues of affordable housing and use every tool at our disposal. Through an inclusive zoning redesign process, through the bolstering of public investment, through things like an affordable housing trust fund, we can expand both Newton's housing stock and as well as our housing diversity. And as many young people do, I've grown up with the weight of climate change looming. And I'm sure we all know that acting with urgency to combat the climate crisis is really the only choice we have left. So we should strive to achieve net zero before our goal of 2050 and invest in green transit and infrastructure and net zero buildings. And finally, it's also crucial we answer the call to racial justice here in Newton. It shouldn't have taken the killing of George Floyd or the waving of a Confederate flag during my time at Newton North for us to have a really serious conversation about systemic racism and incidents of hate and bias. What Newton needs are young, bold leaders who bring a fresh perspective to our city's government and who understand the issues at stake and the comprehensive solutions that'll get us where we want to go. Which is why I've earned the endorsement of groups like Sunrise Boston, the Greater Boston Labor Council, the Massachusetts Women's Political Caucus, the Newton Teachers Association, Engine 6, and numerous current and former elected officials. And so with that, I'm really looking forward to getting into our discussion tonight, and thank you so much again for having all of us.
Thank you so much, Candidate Rinaldi. Candidate Oliver, you may begin your 3-minute opening statement when you're ready.
Great, thank you so much. So my name is John Oliver. A little bit about me. I have been living in Newton for about 18 years now. My wife and I have a 15-year-old, 9th grader at Newton North. I've been engaged in the Newton community for about 10 years now. I started as co-president of my son's elementary school. I'm currently the co-president of the PTSO at Newton North. I am a co-founder of Newton Athletic Fields Foundation. We are focused on the maintenance and modernization of Newton's open spaces and our athletic fields. I'm also an appointed board member at Newton Community Education. By day, I am a consultant, where I've spent the last 20 years solving our clients' more complex and challenging problems. There I have learned how to build consensus around solutions that deliver results. And I'm running for city council because I have the experience and the perspective to navigate to the Newton that we want while still retaining what we love about the Newton that we already have. Ultimately, I believe that Newton's success will require transparency and broad participation from all of our residents. And a few of the complex challenges that we're facing today include housing. I believe that Newton needs a plan that allows for growth in smart ways, that creates diversity in affordability and the types and sizes of housing options we have in the city. Then we need to turn to zoning, because we need to fix what we know is already broken in our zoning code, and then address changes that deliver the growth that we need, not just more $1.2 million condos. When I think about our schools, schools across Massachusetts are reopening for in-person learning at the elementary level within the next couple of weeks. As a parent, I'm incredibly excited about this. As a candidate, I applaud our commitment to reopening, to clearing all of the obstacles that are in our way. And when I think about policing, I'm a strong advocate for a productive collaborative dialogue with our police department over recommendations that will improve public safety for everyone. I would bring a perspective and a lifetime of experience to this job. It would be my privilege to represent you on the Newton City Council, and I'm asking for your vote on March 16th. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate Oliver. Candidate Mickley, you may begin your 3-minute opening statement when you're ready.
Thank you, Malika, and thank you, Dennis, for hosting us. Just want to share a few personal words about why this is meaningful. I grew up down the street from Boston College and went to BC sports games throughout my childhood. So I don't know if the names Jared Dudley, Craig Smith, or Matt Ryan mean anything to you, but that was my childhood. I don't know if BC sports are good anymore, but they were good once upon a time. And Malika, I went to MIT Sloan. It's not the same as the undergrad experience. We didn't have a physics requirement, but just wanted to give a shout out to Beaver Pride. So really cool to be here. Thank you all for hosting this. So first, little background on me. I was born and raised in Newton, one of 3 brothers. Went to college in Atlanta and then came back to Newton afterwards and worked at a few different nonprofits. First, I was a teacher and administrator at a local school. Then I was a fundraiser at Combined Jewish Philanthropies, an organization that gives out grants to a range of community and nonprofit organizations, many of which are in Newton. I then moved to Israel for a few years, where I worked for an organization that brought college students from the US to Tel Aviv to work at startups over the summer. The organization is called Tamid, and the program is called the Tamid Fellowship. Some of you might be familiar with that. I came back to the area to go to business school at MIT, studied finance, then went on to work at Bridgewater Associates, an investment management firm in Connecticut. And now I work for a cryptocurrency startup founded out of MIT, the Delta V program. So, I work with a bunch of recent MIT graduates. I'm 33 and I'm the old guy on the team. So that's kind of a funny experience. 1 minute. Okay, thanks. And that's just about my background. So why I'm getting involved, and just a little bit more on the personal side. I'm married to a woman named Molly. She also grew up in Newton. We have 2 daughters, a 2-year-old and a 5-month-old. And we live a few blocks away from my childhood home where my parents still live. And a big reason why we came back here was we wanted to raise our kids in a city that was a great place for both of us to grow up in. I'm running for city council. This is my first time getting involved in Newton politics, mainly to ensure that Newton continues to be a great place for people to live across life stages. Young families, seniors looking to age in place, working professionals, and that the city's managed in a responsible and sustainable way. And I'm also running in a different sort of way. I'm not raising any political financing or spending any political funds. And I'm doing that for 2 reasons. One is I'm asking folks to donate to one of the local food pantries instead of giving to me, because the food pantries are doing really important work right now, putting food on the table for those in need. And the second, as my first time getting involved in local politics, I wanted to run an independent campaign. So on the priority side, there's a lot of them, and I'm sure we're going to talk in more detail throughout the night. First, when it comes to housing, I think we should grow Newton in a thoughtful way that allows it to be more accessible to more people, while also taking into account, the concerns of residents and the need to, sort of still feel like a suburb with a suburb charm. On the school side, sort of similar to what John was saying, I'm very excited about the progress that's taking place, and also want to keep a close watch on ensuring that we do more and more aggressively in opening the schools. And we'll get to more of the other issues later. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Candidate Mickley. Candidate Lucas, you may begin your 3-minute opening statement when you are ready.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to all for joining us on this forum tonight. My name is Tariq Lucas, and I'm running for City Council because I love Newton. But Newton is at the crossroads. How do we keep the things that we like most about Newton, but at the same time make sure we remain welcoming to people of all incomes and backgrounds? The Newton City Council needs a new pragmatic voice, and if elected, I'll be your rep on the council to listen to you and your concerns. During the day, I work at Harvard University Press as a royalty specialist, and for over the past 2 decades, I've been a youth and adult basketball and soccer referee. I moved to Newton 12 years ago, and it was the best decision I ever made in my life. I was only able to afford to move to Newton because of the natural affordable housing that still exists. And I would like to see other people, other families, compared to where I was in my life 12 years ago, to be able to move and prosper in Newton. And the issue of affordable housing is personal to me because I grew up in low-income housing. But running for city council is a way of giving back to the city that I love and that I call home. And I believe my background, skills, and experience makes me the most qualified candidate to be your voice on the Newton City Council. Over the past several years, I've been actively engaged in our community, and I have a track record of protecting the things that we like most about Newton. As a former elected member and vice president of the Newtonville Area Council, I led on the creation of the Area Council's Envisioning Washington Street survey, and I'm very proud of the work that we accomplished. I currently serve on the Newtonville Historic District Commission. We preserve historical architecture while letting homeowners modernize by adding density and energy efficiency. In 2017, I worked on the No on Charter campaign, which helped preserve local representation in Newton. But let's talk about some of the important issues that the Newton City Council is going to have to tackle in the coming years. The Newton City Council will be voting on a new zoning code and map for the entire city. That means whoever wins the special election will be part of the decision-making process. And with the recent tragic events in the Newton Highlands with the police shooting, we need a city councilor who's trained to be fair, calm, and as the son of a psychiatric nurse, knows firsthand just how valuable the role mental health workers play in our society. I'm also running for environmental justice. We need a city council that will advocate for clean air and clean energy. And we need a city councilor who will pursue sound, practical, and doable solutions to address the concerns of climate change. As an elected member of the Newton City Council, I will be a fair, transparent, and an engaged council member. I ask for your vote on Tuesday, March 16th. Thank you.
Thank you so much, candidate Lucas. Candidate Barash, you may begin your 3-minute opening statement when you're ready.
Thank you. Good evening. And thank you, Malika, Dennis, and Boston College Intercollegiate Government for hosting today. My name is Brian Barish, and I am running for Ward 2 City Councilor at Large, which means every person in Newton can vote for me. I'm running because I'm deeply committed to public service and have the experience to use the tools of government to make a positive impact on the life of every person who lives here, especially those who are most in need. I got my start when Barack Obama first ran for president. I was so inspired by his campaign, I left my job in marketing and I drove out to work for his campaign in Chicago. That led to a position with US Senator Tom Udall. I started my own small business, and then I came up here and moved to Newton to go to Boston College Law School. During my first year there, I met my incredible wife, Claudia. We got our first place together here in Newton, and it's been home ever since, and we're expecting our first child together this summer. I've spent the past 6 years serving as general counsel for a state senator named Harriet Chandler in the legislature. I'm in my second term on the Newton Human Rights Commission, working on issues around diversity and equity. And I'm a board member of a number of local nonprofits, including the New Art Center here in Newtonville. So I bring a diverse set of skills and experiences to the role I'm hoping to play on the council. So what are our priorities? Leading on the environment by not just meeting, but exceeding our climate action goals. So we get where we need to go ahead of time and are a leader for other communities to follow. My leadership on the environment is why I've been endorsed by organizations like the Sunrise Movement and 350 Mass Action. I want to lead on affordable housing. I'm the only candidate willing to use all the tools in our toolbox to address housing affordability and have the experience to know how to do that. That's why I've gotten endorsed by our affordable housing organization, Engine 6. I'm going to be leading on racial justice because systemic racism is real and it happens here in Newton. I'm going to be leading on supporting our schools, getting kids back into the classroom safely, and investing long-term in our schools and our buildings. I'm the proven progressive in this race with the experience to lead, and I have to say I'm very proud this week to have been endorsed by the Boston College Democrats. My name is Brian Barish, and I am asking for your vote on March 16th or by mail.
Thank you, candidates. Our first segment will be on COVID-19. According to a February 23rd report from the Massachusetts Department of Health, Newton's 14-day positivity rate was 0.66% out of over 35,500 tests performed in the 2 weeks prior. Despite the number of tests being performed each week, many Newton residents have expressed concerns about access to the COVID-19 vaccine. After Governor Baker announced adjustments to the Commonwealth's vaccine distribution plan, recently opened vaccine sites at TripAdvisor in Needham and the former Boston Sports Club in Newton were put on hold. Moreover, Newton Wellesley and Beth Israel will not be administering any new first doses of the COVID-19 vaccine. Candidate Barish, if elected, what specific actions will you take to ensure Newton residents have access to the COVID-19 vaccine? You have 2 minutes for your response.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is critically important. We have seniors in congregate care settings. We have students and teachers in our schools. We have frontline workers who need access to this vaccine to protect them. And our governor has made that exceedingly difficult. And we as a city need to push back. I need to fight back and use the tools we have available to us to pass resolutions calling for vaccines to be able to be distributed locally, to call for our teachers to be moved up in the vaccination line. It's a shame that our teachers aren't already being vaccinated because that's key, could be helping us get kids back in the classroom faster. And it's a shame we're not able to do that. I am proud that Newton has teamed up with a local medical office to provide vaccines that are within the governor's guidelines, and that our mayor has shared that through her email. So that is a positive step, but we need to do more. And we need our government, our state government, to let us do more so we can really lead on this issue.
Thank you. And just a reminder to any of the candidates, if you'd like to offer a 1-minute response to that first question, feel free to raise your virtual hand. Candidate Rinaldi.
Great, thank you so much. So Brian made a lot of really great points, I think, especially using the soft power that we have as elected leaders to call on our state delegation to move up classes like teachers is really key. But I think there are other sort of things that we as leaders need to take on. The first of which is just providing that constituent service and that relationship of helping people set up their appointment. Governor Baker has made it exceedingly difficult for people to make vaccine appointments, especially with sort of the botched creation of this internet portal, which for a lot of our older residents is really hard to access and they need help making appointments over the phone. So I think it's just providing that one-on-one help, getting the vaccine publicly ourselves to show that it's safe. I think, and also providing accessible and digestible information about vaccine logistics, local sites that are opening up, and what waiting times are so that people never feel like they're in the dark.
Thank you. Candidate Oliver, you have 1 minute.
Thanks, I appreciate that. And you can just call me John. That's okay, if that's all right. If you're comfortable with it, John works for me. I think there's well, maybe a couple of things that are really important to add to this conversation here. And the first one is that certainly we need to acknowledge that here in Newton, we have lost 201 now, I believe is the count that I heard this morning. 201 Newton residents have died because of COVID-19. That means we have 201 families in this city that are hurting. Our health, our safety is critical. We have got to get this under control. While I can't speak to the challenges that our governor is going through and setting up all these vaccination sites and getting the vaccines into arms, one thing that I think we do need to all agree on across this entire state is that we need to do better. We need to get these shots in arms. We need to get people back to work safely. We need to get our businesses open. We need to get people feeling comfortable. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see your hand. My bad.
No worries. Thank you. Candidate Lucas.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I also want to second what John just said about the 201 COVID deaths. You know, I've been talking to a lot of seniors over the course of this campaign, and they are frustrated. They are frustrated with the rollout of the vaccination. A lot of it is the fact that they don't have easy access to get the vaccination shots. So the city of Newton should definitely take the lead in this process. We should definitely expand on the NUMO program, which is a way for seniors to use transportation through the greater Boston area. And we should be able to drive them to vaccination sites, such as Gillette Stadium or Fenway Park, where they can get their necessary shots to get for COVID-19. And we also need to think about the teachers, getting their teachers vaccinated over the summer, so that way they will feel comfortable in the schools in the fall to teach our young children.
Thank you. And the next question in our COVID-19 segment is.
Dennis.
Oh yeah, sir, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so just I agree with a lot of what was said, that we have to use our soft power to advocate. And you know, there's a really concrete step we could take. As far as getting teachers vaccinated, they should already be vaccinated. They should already be getting vaccinated. In over half the states in the country, some group of teachers are being vaccinated. And you know, while there's so many things wrong that we've done with the reopening of schools, one thing we can do that, you know, regardless of all those wrong things, is just continue to advocate for teachers to get vaccinated. I've been calling Charlie Baker, Governor Baker, to do that. You should call him too. I have his number on my phone right here. It's 617-725-4005. He hasn't called me back yet, but maybe if some of you try, it'll be more effective. So I recommend advocating for that, and also advocating to get vaccines at more local sites, because getting to the mass vaccine centers is just not something that everyone has the time and ability to do. And again, that comes back to our advocacy efforts that we need to take, that we need to start taking charge of.
Thank you. The next question in our COVID segment is going to be again to candidate Lucas. In her recent State of the City address, Mayor Fuller noted that the Housing and Community Development Department has distributed over $300,000 in recovery grants to brick and mortar businesses in Newton and is committed to providing another 300,000, quote, soon. If elected, what specific steps will you take to support small businesses that have been adversely affected by the pandemic, especially as the weather warms?
Yeah, I'm on. Yeah, thank you for the question. We've lost a lot of small businesses here in Newton. I live in Newtonville, and the Rocksteiner on Walnut Street in Newtonville, which was a neighborhood staple, was forced to close down. So I think what the city of Newton should do, we should look to our neighbors and see what they're doing. And I look at Waltham with Moody Street. Waltham shut down all of Moody Street during the warmer summer months. And as a result, the restaurants and all those small businesses were able to have outdoor dining on the street. If the pandemic, and I believe it will, if the pandemic is still here in full force during the warmer summer months, we should definitely identify what streets or what neighborhoods that we could potentially shut down the streets so that our small businesses can stay open. And I do wonder if we were able to do that during this past year, the Rocksteiner would, and many other restaurants and businesses would still be open.
Thank you. I believe candidate Rinaldi, you were up next.
Great, thank you, Dennis. So our city's Economic Development Commission has released a plan with over 30 ways that we as a city can step up and support our local businesses during COVID-19. They're big, they're small, they're expensive, they're inexpensive, and I think we need to do them all. And I look forward to really jumping into that on the council. I think there's that concrete financial relief, like easing, taxes and fees, providing grants for small businesses who are just struggling to make payroll, which is really important. And then there's also the things that don't cost us anything, like what Tariq mentioned with closing down streets like Waltham did with Moody Street, creating space for outdoor markets so people can access the goods and the services that they really want. I think we have immense opportunity with streets like Walnut Street, Watertown Street, to invest in outdoor markets that really create centers of vibrancy in our community. And I think we can take steps large and small to make sure that we support businesses that are the cornerstone of our community.
Thank you. Next, candidate Barish.
Yeah, I agree with much of what's been said. And, I've been leading on this issue. I've been working with restaurants since this summer when, as COVID was getting bad in the spring, I was talking to them saying, what can we do? We were looking at projects like what they were doing on Moody Street. And so we were advocating to city government here in Newton to do better for our restaurants, to allow for more outdoor dining, not just the space right in front of their store. As the winter got worse, I was advocating at the Licensing Commission, working with our Chamber of Commerce to try and get licensing fees cut for our restaurants. And we were able to accomplish that. And Maddie is absolutely right. Now we need to implement the Economic Development Commission's 30-point plan through things like providing grants and loans, like the question brought up. We need more of those, especially targeted at minority-owned businesses. We need to have a buy local program. We don't have one. A lot of communities do. There's so many good ideas in that plan, and I can't wait to dig in and help implement it.
Thank you. Candidate Mickley.
Yeah, thanks. I agree with a lot of what was said, that we need to sort of more aggressively think of ways that we can support restaurants in enabling them to do their business on the streets, in our parks, in areas where it's fun to gather. And as it gets warmer out, we really need to be aggressive on that front. I mean, think about it in Boston, even before the pandemic, the sort of the night shift Owl's Nest spot on the Esplanade. I mean, that's great. Why don't we do that in some of our parks in Newton? So this is actually an opportunity to make Newton more vibrant and support the businesses at the same time. So we need to start doing that.
Thank you. Candidate Oliver.
Thanks. I think that's probably the best idea I've heard yet, David. If you can get an Owl's Nest opened here somewhere in Newton, I'll meet you there. But I do think that it's really important for us to kind of go back to something we've just heard. Yes, Newton has a department that's focused on, our commission that's focused on our small businesses here in Newton. And they do have published a plan. And what I think is really important, instead of just saying we're going to go after all 30 of the recommendations, what I'd like to see us do is tackle that in a very methodical process. Let's start with the high impact, low cost implementations first, and start to iterate on those as we start to see success as we move forward, because we have limited resources in this city, and they're going to have to be applied in a lot of different ways to a lot of different challenges. So while I agree with approaching all 30 of them, let's start at the less expensive, more impactful versions if we possibly can.
Thank you. So our final question, Tariq, because we started with you, we're just going to move on to the next question. Sorry about that. The final question in our COVID-19 segment is on education. In Mayor Fuller's State of the City, she noted her focus on reopening schools fully in September and providing more opportunities for students to learn in person in the spring. Candidate Rinaldi, if elected, what specific steps will you take to ensure Newton Public Schools Newton Public students can re-enter the classroom full-time next fall?
Great question, Dennis. So I think, as a city councilor, our jurisdiction over the budget and the facilities, our school facilities in Newton, is where we play a really key role in ensuring that the financial resources are there to continue maintaining our HVAC upgrades, making sure our, all the dollars are in place to support our Health and Human Services Department as they continue making sure that we have the appropriate safety precautions in place so that we can get our schools open as quickly and as safely as possible. I think, with surveillance testing, we now have an opt-in surveillance testing program for students, which if there are any Newton Public Schools families on this call, I recommend you opt in. My family just did. It takes about 5 minutes to do. But also with vaccination on the horizon, that we make sure we have all of the safety precautions in place and we push for as much in-person as we possibly can here in the spring and aim for a full in-person return in the fall and support students and families to, especially aid in social emotional well-being, which has taken a tremendous hit during this pandemic. But mostly, I think there's a really key community leader role that a counselor plays. While you may not have official, jurisdiction over a lot of the specific rollout of our reopening, I think, taking constituent concerns and making sure that they're directed at the proper channels. In this case, it's our school committee is really important. So I think I'd look forward to using all of those levers to make sure we reopen as quickly and safely as possible.
Candidate Mickley.
Yeah, the city council can and should make this a top priority in the coming months. And one important power the city has is through Article 2, Chapter 11 of the Charter, where the city can have inquiries and sort of public reports of any city leadership, city staff. I think the city should use that lever and hold regular meetings with different leaders of the city, like the Commissioner of Health and Human Services, to be transparent and to be accountable on what's taking place to make sure that our medical advisory group is being used, that steps are being taken, and that we're having real benchmarks that are being hit to have our schools fully reopened as soon as possible. Because to date, we haven't done a great job in doing this compared to other schools. And our city council should demand more accountability and transparency to ensure that happens going forward.
Thank you. Candidate Barish.
Yeah, and this is a critically important issue that I hear from so many people in our community, from parents, and by the way, from teachers too, who want to be in the classroom. And, I've been working for months with local doctors to advocate for asymptomatic surveillance testing. And as Maddie said, please opt in if you haven't already and you have kids in the schools. It's a great program, and the more people that get tested, the more secure we'll be able to be in knowing that teachers and students can be safely in the classroom. And it's also about the upgrades to the ventilation systems that we've now made. We finally have a medical advisory group in place, which I've been advocating for months. And I do think we now have the public safety, the public health conditions for back to in-person learning. Full time, I think we can get it done this spring. I don't think we need to wait until the fall. We need to work with teachers, parents, doctors, and the school community. It's a logistics problem now. And I can be a voice for bringing people together. I work well with all of these groups. I have the endorsement of the Teachers Association. We can get it done.
Thank you. Candidate Oliver. You're on mute.
My bad. Just as a reminder, Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, or DESE, is already calling for elementary schools across Massachusetts to be opened for in-person learning full-time by April the 1st. So this is happening. What is going to be challenging is how quickly can Newton then adapt what we're learning from the spacing issues, the social distancing within our buildings, and apply that to middle schools and high schools rapidly. because Newton has already lost 5% or roughly 700 students to other school districts and private schools in the area. And we need to give our parents a plan well before the fall, because as a parent, I can tell you right now, getting our kids back into school is essential. I see it on my son's face. He's better off when he's in that school
Thank you.
with his peers.
Thank you. Candidate Lucas.
No. Yep. Okay. Many families move to Newton precisely so that their kids can receive an excellent public school education. We have let those parents and kids down. As your city councilor, I will support whatever investments are necessary to restore in-person instruction as quickly as possible and to provide whatever remedial instruction is necessary to make our kids whole again. The science says we can safely reopen the schools, so let's do it. But one thing I would like to say to all the parents and all the students out there, you need to put pressure on the school committee to improve transparency in the process.
Thank you. And Malika, over to our second segment.
Sure. Thank you, Dennis. Next, we'll move to sustainability and energy. 2 weeks ago, the state of Texas suffered widespread power outages and plumbing failures after a powerful winter storm hit the Lone Star State. According to the Austin American-Statesman, at least 86 people died in the Austin area alone due to the deep freeze. Newton's sustainability and energy commitments are obviously much different than that of Texas, but the suffering and loss of life that the Texas power outage caused are an important reminder about the ways in which energy policy and sustainability efforts are tied. First question goes to candidate Oliver. Newton Power Choice provides Newton residents and businesses the opportunity to buy renewable energy to match 80% of their electricity use, the highest amount of any community aggregation program in the Commonwealth. If elected, what specific actions will you take to ensure Newton Energy is sustainable and resilient? You have 2 minutes for your response.
Thank you. I think this is a great question. And like a few of us have already mentioned, I think it's clear that all of these candidates here in both of these races would agree that this is the #1 challenge that we all need to contribute to, right? Climate change, switching over our energy sources from fossil fuels to the grid, to the electrical grid. I think about this all the time. I have a 15-year-old son, and I want to make sure that we're leaving the planet in the best shape we possibly can. Newton has recently, as you mentioned a minute ago, Malika, we have a climate action plan. And I believe that at the core of implementing this plan is something called change management. It's something I do for a living. Because not only do we need to change our behaviors, not only do we need to understand the benefits and the importance of the decisions we make when we choose to replace our windows, put a new roof on our house, to insulate our homes, to switch to an electric vehicle. All of these things not only require understanding the benefits and the importance of making those decisions, but we also need to understand as a community that what we're asking people to do is to change their habits. And that's something I've been learning how to do for the past 20 years as a consultant, is to help understand what are the habits we need to create, what are the habits we need to break, and how can we push forward as a community, because we all have to contribute to this. It's critical that every resident and every small business in Newton is committed to making these changes. And I believe that through my professional experience, I have the ability to lead on those issues. Thank you. All right, that time I saw your hand. That's great.
Thank you so much. Candidate Rinaldi.
Great, thanks Malika. So as a member of Generation Z, I understand that the stakes on this issue are high, which is why I've been endorsed by Sunrise Boston and 350 Mass Action. And resilience specifically is an area that I've worked a lot in. Most recently, I worked at the Department of Energy in the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewables, where I worked specifically on issues of state and local resilience to extreme weather but using it as an opportunity to incorporate energy efficiency and renewable technology to build back better. And that's what we need to do in Newton as we create the infrastructure we want to see. Specifically on Newton Power Choice, I look forward to pressuring our administration to raise our default to 100% renewable energy, as well as spreading information around to our residents to let them know that you can actually opt up to 100% now, which is, very easy and doable. And I recommend if any of you are on Newton Power Choice to do that. I think we need to be diligent and invest in green energy, green infrastructure, open space, really spare no expense, because at the end of the day, this is the city that my generation is going to inherit, and we want to know that we did everything we possibly could.
Thank you. Candidate Barash.
Newton Power Choice represents Newton at its best on climate change. We know that if we're going to meet our challenges, Newton needs to lead. We can be a beacon for the state, for the country, for states like Texas, for the entire planet. And Newton Power Choice is the perfect example. Other communities look to us and they say, Newton's leaving us in the dust. We're embarrassed. That's where I want Newton to be. And I will demand Newton is. I will never miss an opportunity for climate action as a city councilor. I've been a longtime member of Mothers Out Front and Green Newton, working on pushing back against gas leaks and bringing attention to them, creating our climate action plan. And I'm endorsed by Sunrise Movement and 350 Mass Action, people who spend all their time thinking about advocating for this because they trust me to make progress on this issue. I am the clear choice if you care about the environment. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Candidate Lucas.
Thank you. Climate change is a threat to all human life, but it is more of a threat to some than others. Black and brown people will suffer more from the effects of climate change. I will be a leader on this issue by listening to the experts, such as Councillor Emily Norton, who has endorsed me, and Newton's own Energy Commission. Newton is a leader on green policies, but we must do more. We must eliminate fossil fuels from our transportation and heating and help our residents and small businesses transition to EVs and heat pumps instead of gas or oil. We must also plant more trees. Trees sequester the carbon and it cleans the air, prevents flooding, and provides so many other wonderful mental health benefits to our city.
Thank you. Candidate Mickley.
Thanks. So on this issue, the mayor has a bold climate action plan, which I support. That's for Newton to be carbon neutral by 2050. And I think it's helpful to break that down into sub-goals, metrics that we can really measure and be accountable for. Those are 4 goals that we need to achieve over the next 10 years. The first is that everyone needs to opt into 100% renewable electricity. The second is that 33% of cars purchased need to be electric. The third goal is 30% of homes need to be insulated to the max. And the fourth goal is that 16% of homes need to switch to electric heat pumps. I think it's important that we keep those goals front of mind, that we measure our progress towards those goals on a regular basis, and that we do that in a way where it's not just some lofty goal, out in 2050, but that's something that we're taking stock of on a regular basis.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the next question. Candidate Barash, and I'm not sure if I've been pronouncing it correctly this entire time, so could you please correct me?
It's fine, it's Barash.
Barash, okay, thank you so much. Candidate Barash, according to a 2018 report, nearly 40% of global carbon emissions come from construction and construction materials. If elected, what specific actions will you take to encourage sustainable construction practices?
Yeah, this is a great question. So a couple things here. First of all, we need to require that all new buildings are built to a net zero standard so that they, not emitting more carbon. And so we need to absolutely insist on that, requiring solar panels. It's about the envelope of the building. It's about requiring heat pumps and other non-fossil fuel heating technologies. We have the tools to do this through our special permitting process now for larger projects. I'm hoping the state gives us the tools through a net zero stretch energy code to do this, but it's more than that. We also need to be thinking about embodied carbon, which is what happens when we tear down a building and just throw it out. And so I think we should have an embodied carbon ordinance that says that when you tear down a building, you actually have to take account for those materials. You can't just throw them in a dump. You have to reuse what you can. You have to show what you're doing with those materials. And I think we can actually go a long way towards improving that efficiency in the construction process if we really take a look at that. And as a side benefit, it'll also be an additional cost that'll be a bulwark against tear downs of modest price homes that still have a useful life.
Candidate Oliver?
Or John, either one is good. But I think Brian just said something that's really important there. As Newton considers our rezoning and the proposals that go along with it, I think one of the things that's absolutely critical, and we've heard this over and over and over, and I mentioned it in my opening, we know that tear downs that are happening in Newton at an increasing pace have got to stop. We have the ability to stop it. We know it's broken. We know how to fix it. We need to get on that quickly, because tear downs in Newton, the way they're happening, they're bad for our neighborhoods. And as Brian just mentioned, they're horrible for the environment. We got to get out ahead of that. And that's in addition to all of the other issues or initiatives that he just mentioned in terms of making sure that all new development is on the grid, that we're not creating new homes or new residences that are based on fossil fuel consumption. Mission critical for Newton to get right.
Candidate Rinaldi?
Great. So a lot of fantastic points have been made already. I echo Brian's sentiments about net zero buildings. I think both for environmental reasons, they're the right thing to do, but they're also the cost-effective thing to do. If we know that in 10 or 15 years, we're going to be ripping out fossil fuel infrastructure because we need to get to net zero by 2050. So I think requiring new buildings to have net zero heating and cooling is key. Disincentivizing teardowns through zoning redesign is also really important. But more than just disincentivizing teardowns, we need to make it easier for people to modify their existing home and to add accessory apartments. Because right now it is not just expensive, but it's procedurally burdensome, and so people don't even want to engage with that process. And I think as a city, there's a burden on us to make that as accessible and easy for residents as possible, so they aren't turning to a complete teardown, which we know, and it was mentioned before, is much more damaging to our environment.
Finally, candidate Lucas.
Here I am. Yes, thank you. I just want to add on something. We have a wonderful resource here in Newton. It's called newtonenergycoach.org. And if you go to that website, you will find a lot of wonderful information such as what type of heat pump would you like to purchase, information on solar panels. And it's a wonderful website. And we also have hired a person called a Newton Energy Coach. There's going to be someone who's going to be working with residents and small businesses to help us all become better environmental stewards.
Thank you. And forgive me, candidate Mickley, I didn't see your hand, but you're next.
No worries, no worries. Yeah, I agree with a lot of what was said. And I also think that in parallel to those ideas, our zoning code and encouraging more dense development near transit, near village centers, so that people can get to work in an environmentally friendly way, that they can live in areas that, they're able to walk instead of use cars, that we encourage more bike lanes. It's sort of a comprehensive approach to fighting this issue. And I think the way that we build plays a role in that.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to our third segment on affordable housing. One of the major issues in this campaign has been the availability and the affordability of housing in Newton. On every single one of your campaign websites, affordable housing is listed as a top priority, not least because over 75% of low-income households and over 50% of moderate-income households allocate more than a quarter of their income to housing. Candidate Lucas, this first question is to you. One proposal that has been made to expand affordable housing is redesigning the Garden City Victorian homes into multifamily housing units. Do you support this proposal? And if not, what specific plans do you have to support affordable housing? You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Hold on. There we go. Yes, this issue is personal to me. As I said in my opening, I was only able to afford to move to Newton because of the natural affordable housing that is still here. And I grew up in low-income housing, and I also have experienced housing insecurity too. So I totally get this topic and I get this conversation. When it comes to the conversions, I would say that is okay if it's in a current MR zone. I am worried about the elimination of single family zones and single family homes. All that will do, if we get rid of that, is create more expensive housing, which is not the goal of zoning redesign. We need to protect what we like to call the naturally affordable housing in Newton, the type of housing that I live in right now. We also need to increase our inclusionary zoning for large mixed-use developments. We need to increase it for the large ones from 15% affordable up to 25% affordable. We need developers to build more affordable housing, not the bare minimum. And I will be a counselor who will advocate during the special permit process that we get more affordable housing units. We have a new development on Washington Street right now, which is mostly empty because no one wants to pay $4,000, $5,000 a month for rent. We need affordable, we needed more affordable housing in that particular development. So we need a city council that will truly advocate for more affordable housing. I also, the city should also purchase the Armory for $1. That project is wonderful, but we should partner with nonprofit developers to maximize more affordable housing units in it.
Thank you. Candidate Mickley.
Yeah, thanks. I think that the idea of taking some large homes and repurposing them for multifamilies in a way that preserves their look and feel, but allows more people to live in Newton is a great idea. And it's how my wife was able to grow up in Newton. She grew up in multifamilies in those sort of big Victorian homes that were multifamilies. And if you just look at the demographic trends, there's just a need for smaller homes. You know, in 1980, the average household size was nearly 2.8, and now it's 2.5. And our housing stock hasn't increased much. So the idea of, you know, doing something like that can preserve the feel of a neighborhood while also allowing more people to have a smaller entry size home to live in Newton is one that I support.
Thank you. Candidate Barish.
So I support a targeted approach to zoning reform that's very goal oriented. We need to be thinking about what are we trying to accomplish here? And so my goals are, we need to disincentivize teardowns and McMansions. We want to preserve modest price homes that still have a useful life left. We want to incentivize middle income housing and start building starter homes again, have at least some opportunities for that. We want to create accessory apartments so people can downsize within their own home or so that they can have kids move back home. And we want to encourage more apartments and condos in our village centers near transportation, transit-oriented smart growth development that's environmentally friendly. And, you know, I just have to say, one of my opponents mentioned Washington Place being mostly empty. Well, the affordable units aren't, they're full. And 25% of the units in that project are affordable, that I supported getting built because real people have homes as a result. And, you know, I'm the only candidate in the race that was there supporting it.
Thank you. Candidate Rinaldi.
There we go. So on the topic of zoning redesign, like Brian, I think we need a comprehensive and a targeted approach that specifically builds in more multifamily near our transit stops, near our village centers, and helps our city build in the missing middle that we know we desperately lack right now. I think it's also an opportunity for us to invest in our sustainability goals and our accessibility goals for our seniors and our residents with disabilities, because our zoning ordinance, which is decades and decades old, doesn't include provisions that help us tackle those. I think specifically on the issues of, you know, old Victorian homes, I think this is where I see an immense opportunity for accessory apartments to help young folks like myself, you know, move back into Newton once we graduate, when we want to start a life here. Because unfortunately right now there's no viable way to do that. I think especially for older folks in sort of much larger Victorian homes who have extra space, who would love the company, I think there's tremendous opportunity. And I think our accessory apartment ordinance, like I mentioned earlier, is too expensive and procedurally difficult for people to use. And so that's another area that I hope to work on the council.
Thank you. Candidate Oliver.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that. I think that there's, you know, when we talk about affordable housing in Newton, this is an area where Newton has got to do a better job, because not only do I think affordable housing will strengthen our community, but it's also, and very simply, the right thing to do. The original question had to do with conversion of the older, kind of the larger Victorians into smaller units. I completely support that. I think that as long as we're talking about developments that exist within the, the envelope of the existing house, that makes all the sense in the world. Not only does that preserve the historic nature of a lot of these beautiful old buildings, but it provides a lot of housing opportunities of different sizes and types, like I mentioned in my opening, that I think are currently missing from Newton. So from every angle, that is a great opportunity for Newton to start to take advantage of, is converting some of these old Victorians.
Thank you. Our next question is to candidate Mickley. In her State of the City address, Mayor Fuller asked for the City Council's support in zoning so that the next generation can live in Newton and older residents can have places to go when they downsize. If elected, what specific reforms to zoning laws will you advocate for? You have 2 minutes for your response.
Yeah, this is a really personal issue for me. And, we touched on some of these topics before, but I think it's about, one thing is the accessory apartment issue is a huge opportunity that we're not taking advantage of in terms of making it more efficient for people to do accessory apartments, which helps on both ends of the spectrum. Because if you have a big house and, one person or two people are living in there and they're able to make an accessory apartment, that gives a place for, a senior to age in place and for maybe a young family to move in. For my grandmother, she lived in Newton until her 80s. And that was because a BC law student was able to live in an accessory apartment as part of her house. So that's really what made it work. She had the company, she had some rental income. And I think that we need to make that more accessible. We need to make it so that you don't have to go to, 6-12 months of hearings to get that approved. That should be something we encourage, that multi-generational living, that, accessibility for people of different backgrounds, of different ages. And that's probably a first priority that I'd work on.
Thank you. Candidate Oliver.
Thank you, sir. I think that zoning is a critical thing for Newton to get right. But in order for us to get it right, I believe we need to take one step back to take 2 steps forward. What we need is a housing plan, a strategy that everyone has the opportunity to contribute to. Because right now, or most recently, our Zoning and Planning Committee, or ZAP, had been reviewing proposals that were with stated objectives or goals that had not been voted on, that had not been discussed in any way prior to discussing rezoning proposals. It's mission critical for us to design our zoning around a housing strategy that outlines what kind of housing we want, what levels of affordability. Do we want rentals? Do we want ownership opportunities? And where should they be within the city? So we've got to start with the right plan before we consider how we're going to deal with zoning.
Thank you. Candidate Rinaldi.
Thank you. So I think there's tremendous work that we need to take up in zoning redesign. The first of which is incorporating more multifamily, especially near transit and near our village centers, like I mentioned before, using transit-oriented development and mixed-use development to help us build in more housing while also expanding our commercial tax base. Accessory apartments have also been mentioned, which are crucial. And like I said earlier, it's an opportunity for us to, complement our sustainability and our accessibility goals, to put in provisions about net zero and passive house technology, to ensure not just compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act, but universal design so that our city's buildings are truly accessible. And I think community engagement in our zoning redesign process is key, making sure that all residents are up to date on what's going on, know how to engage with and shape the process, and feel like this is something that they can engage with. And whether that, asynchronous opportunities, opportunities on social media and on the internet for residents to get involved and learn about what's going on, I think the community engagement role is also really important.
Thank you. Candidate Barish.
Great. So, we're talking about the different types of housing that we need to meet the different needs of our residents. We have kids who want to move back home. We have older adults who want to age in place and want to have options that work for them and their lifestyle. We want to have homes for people who are living with disabilities or who are mobility impaired. And so we need to have all the different tools that address this, especially as I'm thinking about older adults and the different ways that they might choose to live as they age. And so, accessory apartments including making it so that, unlike the current ordinance, you can have a detached accessory apartment above a garage or within the envelope of the existing building, making that easier so you can downsize within your own home. Having one floor living options in our village centers near public transportation, especially if you can't drive anymore, that's a critical need. We have congregate care settings, and we're going to need to continue to have those. And we have independent living settings like Two Life Communities, which does an amazing job. And they have a great new proposal, ways for a way to create modest priced independent living units here in Newton. I think it's a wonderful proposal. I'm very much looking forward to getting to review that proposal on the council. And so, as you can hear, there's all these different ways and needs seniors might have.
Candidate Lucas.
Yes, thank you, Dennis. Yes, I think we all want Newton to be, we want it to be open and accessible to people of all incomes and backgrounds, but I think our approach is different and our priorities are different. When it comes to zoning, you know, there's a lot of things on the table right now. In the most recent draft of zoning redesign, there was allowing multifamily housing by right in every residential district. Again, I think that is a bad policy. If we eliminate single family zoning, all that will do is create more expensive housing, which is, again, not the goal of zoning redesign, and will not create affordable housing. You know, Mr. Barish has said that he prefers a targeted approach, but he also supports a citywide elimination of single family zoning. I have it right here to prove it. So, you know, this is a big difference between me and my opponent.
Thank you. Candidate Barish, if you'd like to respond, we can give you 15 seconds.
Yeah, I would. It's just not true. I've been very clear that I prefer a targeted approach to zoning. And multifamily by right is not in the most recent proposal, and nobody in this race has been advocating for it. It's just not true.
Thank you. We'll leave it up to the voters. And I think that'll end our third segment. So Malika, if you'd like to begin us on our fourth segment.
Sure. Thank you, Dennis. Next, we'll move to policing. Although issues of race and race neutrality in law enforcement have long plagued the United States, these challenges came to the forefront this past summer as millions took to the streets to protest the killing of George Floyd and others. In response, Newton Mayor Fuller formed the Newton Police Reform Task Force this past July. First question goes to candidate Rinaldi. One of the task force's preliminary recommendations is to create the Newton Police Committee. Do you support this recommendation? If not, what other specific steps will you take to ensure equity in law enforcement? You have 2 minutes for your response.
Great, thank you, Malika. So to answer your question, yes, I do support the creation of that committee. I think local citizen oversight of our police department is key. And I look forward, you know, one of the first tasks that we will take on as the counselors is seeing to the implementation of the recommendations of our police reform task force, making sure that they're implemented not just swiftly, but comprehensively. And then, you know, taking a step back and evaluating where we are. What's working? What's not working? Where are holes that need to be filled? You know, I believe that we need a comprehensive, evidence-based approach to public safety that builds us a 21st century administration. I think we need to work on all fronts, from mandating de-escalation and duty to intervene, as well as integrating with mental health and substance abuse professionals. Because we need to make sure that no resident, whether they are a person of color, they're disabled, they're LGBTQ, never see our police department as a source of fear. And I think, you know, those changes aren't reflective of hatred or frustration with police officers themselves, who I think, you know, serve this community and love this community, but of broader systemic issues that you mentioned and that Newton is not immune from.
Candidate Barish.
Yeah, I think we have to start by acknowledging that systemic racism is real, and it happens in Newton like it happens in every other community. I've heard the stories of bias from residents of color that they've personally experienced. I know that this is real. And so I do think we need to engage in an evidence-based conversation about police reform to ensure that we are addressing these kinds of incidents, and to include things like the 8 can't wait reforms that you know, include requiring de-escalation and having appropriate use of force standards, that we're addressing mental health and substance use as part of our emergency response system, that we're requiring body cameras so we can review incidents after the fact. These are the types of evidence-based reforms that I'm hoping we can adopt to help create 21st century public safety for all.
Candidate Lucas?
Yes. Oh, there I am. Thank you. As a Black man living in America and a Black man living in Newton, policing is something that has always been on my mind. And I want to work with our police when it comes to reforms and potentially updating our policies and procedures. I want to work with them. I don't know if this question is going to come up, but the question of whether or not we are going to fund the Newton Police, that's not something I'm a big fan of. Representative Jim Clyburn of South Carolina, one of the leading Black voices in America right now, and a longtime civil rights activist, does not want to defund the police. He would rather reform the police and work with our police departments.
Candidate Mickley?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of the sentiments that Tariq just said. And, I think it has to come from a place of partnering with our police. I mean, we look at Newton, it's one of the safest cities in the country. It's been that way for years. It's thanks to the hard work of our police officers. Their job is hard. And, if you look at what also came out of the task force, we found that morale was low, that their facilities are falling apart. So we need to figure out how to support them better and work on issues to improve their work at the same time. So, having regular citizens involved in that process is great, but it needs to be from a place of partnership and gratitude for the work they're doing.
Candidate Oliver?
I think that's a perfect sentiment. Most of the police officers that I've been speaking to, I live in a neighborhood where there are several police officers, both Newton police as well as state police live in my neighborhood. I think what's critical, because the thread that I keep hearing through all of these conversations that I've been having, is that they want more they want a better relationship, not only with our city councilors, but with our mayor and the city as a whole. Because as David just mentioned, Newton has consistently been ranked as one of the safest cities in this entire country. And a large part of that credit belongs to the Newton Police Department. I want to work with them to listen to the recommendations. We know that there are places that deserve improvement. We know that they want to partner with us in making those improvements. And I want to lead in that effort and in that conversation. And part of leading in that conversation is that mutual respect that I think I uniquely, in my particular race, bring to the table.
All right, thank you guys so much. We will be moving to the next question. And this question is for candidate Oliver. Another one of the task force's preliminary recommendations discusses diversification of the Newton Police. How will you ensure that this recommendation is actualized and that there is accountability in implementing other task force recommendations? You have 2 minutes.
Certainly. If I could, you mean diversification in terms of responsibility, because that's been a big topic, or do you mean diversity in like human resources?
The latter.
Fabulous. So one of the initial recommendations that we heard about just a few weeks ago that came from the, sorry, I take my hand down, it's distracting, that came out of the Reform Task Force was quite simply a recommendation to consider removing Newton from the portion of the civil service platform that controls the candidates that come through for interviews and for hiring. Because as we all know, there are systemic biases and racism all throughout our entire country. And every single person that I've spoken to in NPD believes that we need to improve our hiring and personnel retention programs. And I definitely believe that we're on the right track to doing that. I think that what we're going to see, or what I hope we're going to see coming out of these recommendations, are opportunities for the city to have a significant dialogue that leads to change that we need in order to make sure that we're improving, our community safety for everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to answer that one.
Candidate Lucas?
Yeah, thank you. I agree with a lot of things that Mr. Oliver just said, and I think we should have a more racially diverse police force. But I think it shouldn't just be with policing; it should be all of our municipal departments. Every department within our city should have an internal audit on hiring practices to make sure that we're not only hiring the best qualified candidates, but also a diverse field also as well, to make sure we get more diversity in all of our departments.
Candidate Rinaldi?
Yeah, so expanding a little bit on what Tariq just said about the need for us to have diverse hiring across all fields in Newton, whether it's law enforcement or, students, teachers and staff in our schools, minority-owned businesses, there's tremendous work we have to do. And it has to come from a place of understanding that, our citywide culture needs to be conducive to people of color wanting to live here and work here. If we continue to have incidents of hate and bias swept under the rug, if we continue to, make it increasingly difficult for residents of color and low-income residents to live in Newton, we're not going to attract that kind of workforce. I think we need to take this on in all sectors of our city and make sure that, structurally, but also environmentally, it's a thing, we're a city and we're a place that people want to live and they want to work in. And I think there's work to do in our police department, but also in our schools, our local businesses to really make that a reality.
Candidate Barish?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. We need to be engaging in more diverse hiring for teachers, for police, for city staff, all the way around. I'm a member of the Human Rights Commission, where we see incidents of hate or bias. I think that is a key part of retention, is making sure that Newton is a city that feels welcoming to people of color, because when I have these conversations, that's not always the case. And so pushing back against incidents of hate or bias within city government, within the schools, creating an environment where more candidates of color want to live here and that we have more diverse housing options. I think all of this plays a role. And I also want to point out, it goes broader than that too, because this is true of diversity in many of its forms, of addressing ableism and people living with disabilities, feeling safe and comfortable here in the community, people who are LGBTQ+, which is a particularly important issue to me. We had an LGBTQ+ liaison in the city. We had that position filled. It is not currently filled. I think we absolutely need to fill that, and that's going to be a priority for me if we get on the council. So it's, I completely agree, but I think there's a broader part of this conversation as well.
Candidate Mickley?
Yeah, I think sort of having a diverse staff starts with the hiring practices and the recruiting practices, and it means proactively ensuring that we're reaching out to different communities and getting diverse candidates for any job, whether it's police or other jobs across the city. And it's also about creating relationships with other communities beyond Newton, at the city level, at the community organization level, at the nonprofit level, so that, people feel welcome to Newton and that there's real relationships and bonds between the people that live here and people that live in other communities, so that, those opportunities, people hear about them. When there are job openings, people know about them. And it really all comes down to connections and relationships that we need to foster with the broader greater Boston ecosystem.
Thank you guys so much. We will be wrapping up this section with our final question, which is directed to candidate Barish. The Newton Human Rights Commission recently reviewed another report of transgender hate speech on an online platform that was associated with students at Newton South High School. In a recent GBH article, you reflected on your work with the commission, including issues of LGBTQ+ discrimination. If elected, what specific plans do you have to ensure that Newton schools are an inclusive educational space? You have 2 minutes for your response.
Yeah, it's a great question. And one thing I want to point out is, again, as I mentioned in my last answer, we do need to have that LGBTQ+ liaison position filled, because I think we need to be thinking about how we can create safe spaces. And, part of that is making sure that that is true in our schools. And I've been working with school committee member Tamika Olszewski through the Human Rights Commission on a series of policies to address incidents of hate or bias. So we have some consistency in how we address them across city government, both city side as well as in our schools. And, I've heard from parents the different issues around ableism, around LGBTQ plus bias that happen in the schools. And I really think there needs to be some consistency. Some of them are handled well, some are not. It differs school by school. We really need to get some consistency there. That's what I'm really focused on.
Thank you. Candidate Rinaldi?
Great, thank you so much. So I think in terms of supporting students, especially those who are LGBTQ, it's about making sure that the resources in the community are there to set people up to be successful and to form relationships through, our school's gender and sexuality alliances, but also through adequately addressing hate and bias. When incidents occur, you know what it's like when, I remember what it was like to see, swastikas drawn on the bathroom stalls and nothing being done about it. What that does to you, as a Jewish student, what that must feel, for a student of color. It doesn't feel good. You don't feel safe and you don't feel welcome. Beyond that, I think we need to invest in diverse curricula that's LGBTQ inclusive. I remember during my American history class, we did like a 1-day unit on LGBTQ history in America, and then we got back to the regular curriculum. That can't fly anymore. And finally, I think making extracurriculars like sports and arts inclusive and welcoming to LGBTQ students is key, and making sure that we work collaboratively with our school committee and student organizations to really make that happen.
Thank you. Candidate Oliver?
Thank you. I think that simultaneously, as a co-president of the Newton North PTSO, I can speak firsthand to what is going on here, what we're talking about, because the PTSO works closely not only with our principal, Dr. Turner, but the entirety of NPS to bring forward programming that mirrors what's going on in the programming and the instruction that's going on in our classrooms with our students. But we're bringing that home to parents and bringing it into people's living rooms so that they have a parallel conversation going on, that they understand what's going on in our schools. Because I can honestly say that I was both shocked at some of the things that are going on in our schools, not only for people of color and LGBTQ communities, but the Asian population that exists within Newton South and Newton North, and I'm sure other schools as well. We need to do more. And this is a really important issue that I'm proud to be working on as a member of the PTSO at Newton North.
Thank you. Candidate Lucas?
Yes, thank you. I want to just second what all the candidates have said about diversity and inclusion in our Newton public schools. And the city of Newton has just recently hired a new diversity, equity, and inclusion director, Kathy Lopez at Newton North. If elected, I do look forward to working with her on a lot of these really important issues. Earlier on in this campaign, I was speaking with a young Black student at Newton North, and he tells me these stories that you read in the paper, they're real, and we need to get to work on these particular issues. So I look forward to working with Kathy Lopez in the near future.
Thank you all for your thoughtful responses. Candidate Mickley?
Yeah, sorry, I thought my hand was raised. Now it is. I agree with a lot of the sentiments that were shared. Sort of what Candidate Oliver was saying about bringing it home and making sure these conversations aren't just in the school, and what Candidate Lucas was talking about, sort of the importance of, the diversity of leadership coming from the city level and also permeating to the schools. And I think it's really, it's a two-pronged approach. One is, proactively creating safe spaces, making sure that people have a space to be who they are and express themselves. And the other is no tolerance for hate acts. I mean, we just really can't tolerate that sort of stuff. And there has to be a clear line on what's not allowed. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Candidate Mickley. Thank you all for your very insightful responses. I'll be passing the mic off back to Dennis.
Before we move to closing statements, I want to ask one final question in the spirit of inclusivity, which I think is a tone that we've all struck on this policing segment. This is a question that was submitted through the Boston Intercollegiate Government's online form. And in the spirit of inclusivity and respect, we'd like to give an opportunity for any or all of the candidates to make a comment. Recently, an ad was placed on Newton news sites and blogs attacking a candidate by anonymous, quote, "Save Nunatum PAC," end quote, using alleged statements made by a former counselor to target a member of this race. So I'd like to give an opportunity for any of the candidates, if they'd like to provide a comment, to do so. Feel free to just raise your hand and we'll give each of you a minute. Candidate Barish.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that I've made a commitment to running a positive campaign. I'm calling on anyone who would support my campaign to remain positive. Talk about the reasons to vote for me. I reject negative attacks and negative campaigning, impugning people's character. That's the kind of thing that we see at the national level. That's Trumpian tactics. That's not Newton. And so I hope my fellow candidates will join me in deciding to run positive issue-oriented campaigns in these final weeks.
Candidate Lucas.
Here we go. Yeah, I just want to second what Mr. Barish just said. No one should be attacking anyone's character. This should be a campaign focused on policies and issues and track record. So I agree with him on that regard.
Thank you. Candidate Rinaldi.
And I would just add that, that's entirely an attempt to distract us from conversations like the ones we're having tonight that are substantive, that are based in policy discussions that are going to drive our city forward, on environmental issues, on housing issues, on racial justice, on investing in our commercial districts. And that's what our conversation should be about. Because as a city, there's lots of work to be done on a lot of really urgent problems. And the more time, we spend getting involved in sort of petty disagreements and negative campaigning, it's not fair to the residents of Newton who deserve a future that's a lot better than the present. And I think that's the kind of campaign that I'm focused on running. And I would encourage folks watching at home to think about, how as a city you want us to move forward and the kind of leadership that you think that requires.
Thank you. Candidate Mickley.
Yeah, I just want to state for the record that I agree with everything that was just said so that I don't think otherwise.
Thank you. And Candidate Oliver.
Well, like David said, I concur. We need to be focused on what it is we're here to do, the job that we're currently interviewing for, and focus on the topics that Newton voters really need to know about and where we fall out as candidates in terms of our thinking, how we approach problems, and really focus in on what Newton needs us to do. So thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the conclusion of all of our segments. So now we'll move into closing statements, beginning with Candidate Mickley. You have 2 minutes for a closing.
Yeah, thanks. I guess this is our last debate, or at least it's the last debate I'm invited to. So first, I just wanted to thank Dennis and Malika for hosting us, but thank Brian, John, Tariq, and Maddie. It's been a pleasure going through debate season with the four of you. We've had a lot of time together over the past few weeks, and I've really enjoyed the conversation. And then I just want to sort of leave the voters with these last thoughts is, it's a real competitive race that we're having in the next few weeks. And there's all sorts of great ideas on the table and different candidates. In Ward 2, you have Brian, Tariq, and me. When I entered this race, it was sort of a crazy long shot idea, but over the past few days and few weeks, people have been reaching out and there's been real support. So all I'd say is vote for the candidate that you think has the ideas that resonate most with you. If it's Brian, vote for Brian. If it's Tariq, vote for Tariq. And if it's me, vote for me. You can learn more about our issues on our websites, through the debates. There's many forums, there's many recordings. And really, this is just a chance to express your preferences of, one of the 24 city councilors that you want to see represent your voice going forward in how Newton can be a better city, both for its residents and for people that want to move here. And that's sort of my focus is thinking about what the city government can do to serve its people and people that want to move here. So if you have questions, thoughts, ideas, I'd love to hear from you. I love getting questions and ideas from constituents or residents. So my email is mickleyfornewton@gmail.com. Please reach out. And thanks again for listening.
Thank you. Next, Candidate Oliver.
Great, thank you so much. As I mentioned a minute ago, This is also my first race. This is the first time I've been running for a public office. And what I'm learning is that a campaign is a lot like a job interview. So in essence, I'm asking you to hire me as your next Ward 1 city councilor at large, because I do believe that my skills, my experience, and my perspective make me the best candidate for this job. I'm relentlessly focused on navigating to our best Newton. I'm committed to working with you on solutions that are going to get us there. I'm asking for your vote on March 16th, whether that's in person or mail-in ballot or early in-person voting. There are a lot of options here, but thank you all for your time and your attention. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, candidate Lucas.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you for attending this very last forum of the year. This certainly has been a wild ride in this very special election. I just want to say I am the candidate in this race who has a track record of supporting local representation and reaching out to you, the residents of Newton, and the small businesses of Newton too. There's a lot of policies that are on the table right now. Earlier I mentioned about the policies regarding zoning, allowing multifamily housing by right all over the city. I want to be very clear on this. This is a very dangerous policy that will turn Newton into an exclusive community and raise the tax burden for seniors living on fixed incomes. And when it comes to special interests, you, the residents of Newton, will always be my special interests. I do not take campaign contributions from developers or from the oil lobby. Over 95% of my campaign contributions come from you, the residents of Newton. I'm here for you and I got your back. I ask for your vote on Tuesday, March 16th. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, candidate Barish.
Thank you. My wife Claudia and I moved here almost 10 years ago to build a life together. We have our first child on the way. These issues are deeply personal for me. I am asking you to place your trust in me and my deep state and local experience, whether it's maintaining the roads or getting our kids back into school or making good on the promises of environmental sustainability, affordable housing, and racial justice. I've been endorsed by the Sunrise Movement and 350 Mass, by Progressive Newton, by Engine 6 and Voters for a Vibrant Newton for my leadership on affordable housing, by 18 labor unions, including teachers, nurses, ironworkers, by state leaders like Jesse Mermel and Don Berwick and Bob Massey and Steve Grossman, Quentin Palfrey, you know, City Council President Susan Albright, and 14 of our 22 councilors. I think you get the point, because I've been a state and local leader for over a decade. And as a Boston College Democrat myself, I'm proud to be endorsed by the BC Dems. My name is Brian Barish. I'm asking for your vote on March 16th or by mail, because you can trust my experience, values, and record of leadership. My website is brianbarish.com. Thank you to Big for inviting us here today, and to all of those listening at home. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, candidate Rinaldi.
Thanks, Dennis. So first, I just want to say another big thank you to Boston Intercollegiate Government for hosting tonight. It's been awesome getting to talk with everybody. So I'm asking for your vote because I understand the difficulties and the hardships that are at stake right now. And I'm committed to not just resolving them and achieving a more equitable future, but at doing it in a way that brings more of our city along with me. I believe it's one thing to express support for an issue like affordable housing or environmental justice, but it's another to really understand the nuances and complexities of that issue and to pursue bold, brave decisions when it's not the convenient thing to do. We have tremendous work to do if we want to meet the urgency of this moment, and I'm committed to it every step of the way. I grew up as part of a generation of young people who became activists on really important issues because we didn't have another choice. We have been tasked with dealing with the world's most urgent problems, but because of that, we have learned to step up and to lead. And so I'm eager to bring my experience as a seasoned political advocate and my fresh perspective as a young resident of our city to the council and to help us tackle the urgent problems we're facing, from racial equity and a just recovery from COVID to affordable housing and environmental justice. So I humbly ask for your vote tonight. Thank you all for listening to us tonight. You can find more information about my campaign at renalifornewton.com. Please never hesitate to reach out to ask questions and raise concerns or just to chat. I really hope to earn your support on or before March 16th for the Ward 1 at-large seat. Thank you all so much and have a great night.
On behalf of our entire Boston Intercollegiate Government team, I would like to thank candidates Barish, Lucas, Mickley, Oliver, and Rinaldi for joining us tonight. We hope that this event has proven informative for members of the Newton community, and a recording will be posted on our social media pages and YouTube as soon as possible. To learn more about how to vote in this election, we encourage you to visit the following link: www.newtonma.gov/government/elections. And before we wrap up, if each of the candidates could give us a smile for a Zoom picture, we would really appreciate it. We'll give it 10 seconds and hope someone screenshots. All right. Thank you guys so much for joining us today, and have a great rest of your night.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night, everybody.